A new age is upon us, an age of great turmoil. Welcome back to another video, and today I'll be recapping the Conan dev stream on the 22nd of May. Link to the full VOD is in the description, and we'll be covering everything today. So without further ado, let's get started. The stream started off with a brief overview of the Age of Sorcery and its successes. The Age of Sorcery resulted in Conan's third highest ever Steam population. The post-launch population peaked higher than the free week on the initial launch of the Age, forum activity quadrupled, and on average, more people are playing for longer, which is very impressive. This was just a brief retrospect on the Age of Sorcery, and now we can get into the New Age. The New Age coming to Conan Exiles is the Age of War. This age is going to bring new sweeping changes to the core mechanics of the game, new interactions in the PvE and PvP modes, and has some lofty promises that will play out over the course of the age. This age focuses primarily on updates to the Purge and the combat system. This is a 3-chapter age running in the usual 3-month cycle, so let's get right into the first chapter. Chapter 1 is the Chapter of Treasure. This is a foundational chapter that Chapter 2 and 3 will build heavily upon. Think of it as laying the groundwork for what's to come. Chapter 1 will include clan hordes, offer clan emblems, it will bring the beginning of combat and weapon changes, and of course new items on the Bazaar, the Battle Pass, and free content too. The main activity in Chapter 1 will be collecting and building. You'll be able to construct a new treasure room in your base and then venture out to collect treasure and riches in the form of gems, relics, etc. from enemy camps, allowing you to keep a tally of how much wealth you've accrued. Clan Hordes is the term for your stash of treasure. This is a specified room where all your treasure is gathered, which manifests in relics and piles of coins scattered across the floor around a central chest and an NPC that serves as the treasure keeper. The chest in the centre is effectively the workbench and can be placed within the room of your choice to create your hoard. The NPC next to the chest is basically the accountant of the hoard. Gold and silver coins and bars count as treasure too, which will fit in the chest, but there are also heroic treasures like the Lemurian statue or the Deketo cat statue, and they have to be placed in the room and must be carried around by hand, leaving you vulnerable to attacks from humans or NPC enemies. You can also walk and teleport with these heroic treasures, and there are some stretch goals to allow horses or thralls to carry it, but they may not come in this age. These treasures will be found across enemy encampments throughout the Exiled Lands and the Isle of Siptar. There will be smaller treasure items like the aforementioned gold and silver coins, bars, etc., but there is also the chance to find these larger heroic treasures. These are worth considerably more, but will need to be transported back to your treasure room. The chest in the centre of the room offers an overlay effect that shows the area of effect for the treasure room, and anything placed within the room's area of effect counts towards your treasure hoard. The treasure room was also built using the dungeon building set. This appears to be a new stone-based set that has an appropriate dungeon feeling about it. I noticed an oubliette-esque ceiling, and the walls seem thicker than regular walls. There's also some new dungeon placeables such as shackles, which you can place yourself in, or an unconverted thrall. We didn't really get to see too much of this new building set or some of the new dungeon-themed placeables, though I presume they'll either be in the Battle Pass or the Bazaar, so I'll be able to give you a closer look once the update comes out. In this room, Andy and Dennis briefly showed off a new diving animation, so you can swan dive into water, or as shown on the stream, you can just dive headfirst into your coins. There's a new clan emblem workbench which allows you to design and customise a clan insignia that will be placed on certain shields, wall pieces and banners, which is very cool. There's even a draped horse saddle that carries your insignia. The insignia can be edited by anyone in your clan that has the correct clan role, which you can set to avoid griefing. The insignia editor allows you to pick from preset foreground and background icons, with more coming in the future in the Battle Pass and the Bazaar. You can also change the hue, saturation and tone values. If someone in your clan has an emblem piece you don't have from the Battle Pass or the Bazaar, they can edit the insignia and it will still display, as all the pieces bearing the insignia will also automatically update. If you're a PvP player and you loot an enemy's item that has their insignia on it, it will automatically change to your clan's insignia. That's a little bit of a shame. It would be very cool to be able to take trophies from your enemies, but hopefully that is something that could be done in the future. Away from treasure, we also have the combat rework, which comes with some AI optimizations too, but we'll touch on that in a moment. Firstly, there is a rework for stamina. Stamina cost for attacks and jumps is greatly increased, and this is really targeted at regular complaints like dagger spam, but stamina regen now begins almost instantly and is faster than it was before. Through this system, enemies now have openings to attack, but they do have lower health across the board, though they will deal more damage, adding a new sort of ebb and flow to combat. Stamina costs generally are aimed to make sense based on the size of the weapon, and heavy attacks will always take considerably more stamina, but as a counterpoint will always apply a status effect and deal more damage. However, stamina regens faster as I mentioned earlier, and the regeneration begins at 0.1 seconds after an attack animation has finished, so you'll start regenerating stamina almost instantly. Additionally, enemies no longer have the hidden mechanic of a tolerance to stun locks. Previously, if you continually stun locked an enemy, say for example with a katana, they will eventually become immune for a short time. This is no longer the case, and I got the impression that if you land an attack that would incur a stun, then it will, regardless of how many times they've been stunned. With the new changes to stamina, this could cover your bases and give you a brief reprieve as you step back to regenerate stamina. There are also some new two-skull champions, and large enemies like dragons and elephants have multiple target points. Target lock is also getting some improvements, especially around larger enemies as I mentioned. You can now target the legs, the body and the head of larger animals, which reduces the crazy camera swing that would often happen, and should be especially useful for people that suffer from motion sickness. Dennis mentioned they're also working on some improvements to rotate whilst attacking. Currently, an attack will cast in pretty much the initial direction it was pointed at, which can sometimes result in misses. They're currently working on a system where the attack will loosely track the enemy to a certain point, hopefully avoiding those awkward situations where a tier 1 Dafari fighter just casually sidesteps your great axe. Weapon classifications have also been updated, with legendary weapons getting a huge buff. They will now be much more powerful, like top of the tree powerful, but will not be craftable anymore. They also won't last forever, as all weapons now degrade and will eventually completely break. When you repair an item, you'll have to use a repair kit, which will slowly damage the total durability of the weapon until it becomes impractical to use or entirely breaks, similar to the grindstone that was introduced in the Chapter 3 update. This system is encouraging you to go out into the world, try new weapons and explore more areas. From experience, in the admittedly small amount of PvE I've played, I came across Musashi's Black Blade at around level 25, basically never stopped using it, so this is definitely going to help with weapon diversity. Dennis did say this won't be a Breath of the Wild situation though, you won't just get a couple of hits and your weapon breaks, so weapon durability is quite forgiving. So that is about what we can expect from Chapter 1, it's very much a staging platform for the great run and leap that Chapter 2 and 3 will take. Chapter 2 is what I'm calling the Chapter of Conflict. Chapter 2 will primarily bring a revamp of the Purge. Currently, the Purge is a bit of a pain. It can be used to get some good fighters and thralls, but generally it can be considered somewhat annoying. I think we can all admit as well that the Purge is often quite janky at times. In Chapter 2, the Purge will now become an optional mechanic that is based upon how much treasure you have and will behave very differently. Firstly, and most importantly, Dennis said the Purge is now entirely opt-in, similar to the Convergence trap. You can essentially choose when you want a Purge to occur, and it's gone from an overbearing mechanic that kind of punishes base building to something that ideally, players will now want to interact with and they can choose when to do so. When you call a Purge will now come and set up a forward operating base near your base, and then will attack your base with the purpose of breaking in, getting to your treasure room and stealing your treasure. It seems the Purge might be composed of the Stygian army primarily, and will act as a fighting force to steal treasures from us lowly exiles. This is where laying the groundwork in Chapter 1 really comes in, as all that treasure you've accrued, you'll be able to spend it to better improve your base, and defend it against enemy sieges, and gathering more treasure will increase the difficulty of the enemies you face. The gameplay loop for this chapter seems to be gather treasure, defend from a Purge, reap rewards, and then spend your treasure to defend against a harder Purge with presumably better rewards should you survive. Additionally, when Chapter 2 comes in, if you're out and about in the world collecting those heroic treasures from NPC camps, relic hunters will also be able to ambush you as you're moving that treasure. With Chapter 2 there will also be a bit of a loot rework. Dennis said that they'd done quite a few playtests and pretty much every time they opened a chest in an enemy camp it was very disappointing. Therefore, chests in enemy camps will now never give you base resources like wood, stone, fibre, etc. Instead, you'll be able to get combination materials, and you'll also have the chance of getting new unique weapons or armour pieces that will offer interesting and powerful rewards, though, as mentioned earlier, they are not permanent. There's also some planned features as part of the combat and AI rework to reduce how many enemies can attack you at once. Rather than getting ganked by the entirety of New Azagarth at once, enemies will instead aim to stream towards you whilst others effectively wait their turn, shouting taunts from the sides. Enemies have also had their senses reduced to aid in this new change. This is to reduce getting absolutely swarmed in certain areas, and to give you a more satisfying take on overwhelming combat. Enemies also won't chase you as far as they used to, which is quite nice as I have been chased at considerable distance. With the new balance based on fighting one or even two people at once, this seems like a very welcome change. There wasn't a ton of in-depth detail about Chapter 2, I feel like there'll probably, well of course, be more detail about that in the Chapter 2 reveal stream, which should be around September of this year. I feel like this is probably actually a really big part of the overall age and probably something that will be massive for the game. Though of course, with it still being quite a ways out, they probably didn't want to commit to too many details whilst it's still in development. Over to Chapter 3, there was only a few details about Chapter 3, but it sounds like it's the Chapter of Revenge. The major feature shown on the roadmap is a PvE raid. There was very little said about this. I've said for a few years now that I wanted to see a PvE raid, so I'm very excited to hear more about this. They only touched on a few other features, one of which was clan alliances. They're also planned for Chapter 3. This would reduce PvP damage done to allied players and disable target lock on them, allowing you to forge an alliance with other groups to take on content together without accidentally decapitating your allies. However, if you're careless, you still can do at least some damage to them. They also briefly skimmed over something they're calling fatalities, which are really gritty and violent ways to finish off enemies you kill. Again, there was very little detail on this, probably because it is about 6 months out as of the time of recording, but the way I'm visualising it, I'm guessing it'll be somewhat similar to Skyrim, how you can kind of execute an enemy that's low health. I think that will be the same here. So those are the main features of all the three ages, and now we'll move on to the other topics covered. Firstly, the Battle Pass. The devs briefly showed off the Battle Pass for Chapter 1. Of course, there are new war paints, armours and placeables, many of which look very nice. This was also where they mentioned there are some changes coming to emotes, namely allowing some emotes with certain weapons such as shield bashing, a guardian-esque stance for two-handed swords, etc. There's also some new emblem pieces to go with the clan insignia designer. They mentioned these in a similar context to wall paints. Now, wall paints and floor paints have kind of grown on me, to be honest. I didn't like them at first, but now I actually quite like them. However, sometimes they are a bit oversaturated in the Battle Pass, so if they're gonna kind of maybe cut half of those off and replace them with emblems for the insignia creator, I'm quite happy with that. There's also a ton of Stygian themed items in the Battle Pass which suit the theme of the chapter well and fill an otherwise fairly empty niche in the game, considering how important the Stygians are in the overall lore. The devs touched very briefly on the Bazaar. Some of the new items are Stygian Soldier, Stygian Commander and the Veneer Shaman. I believe the new dungeon set is probably in the Bazaar too. There really wasn't a lot of detail given to the Bazaar, but we'll get to see more when the update goes live. Now over to the quality of life section. I mentioned a couple of these earlier, like the Swan Dive and the target lock adjustments, but there are also some additional fixes and adjustments. Firstly, they fixed the Thrall decay timer so Thralls no longer just kind of float around, as Dennis said. Secondly, they've adjusted some spells to act as toggles rather than active timed effects. This will be for some spells like Detect Resources, so you can cast the spells, toggle them off and on, rather than only having the effect briefly. There are some adjustments to darkness at night. There's a subtle spotlight around the character giving you some better visibility, though a torch will still always be preferable. Additionally, there will be new server options for the items lost on death, where you can choose to lose everything, lose nothing, or just backpack inventory rather than what's on your hotbar and armour if you wish to utilise those features. There was a few mentions of bug fixes as well. Andy mentioned they are aware of the issues with disconnections on consoles and there is a fix in place for that issue. It will likely come with the launch of the Age of War, and Andy mentioned they would have liked to push it out sooner, but console certification makes updates a bit more difficult, so it's rolled into this update. There's also a few smaller bug fixes, such as grass appearing incorrectly after leaving a dungeon. They mentioned an issue with the final Twitch drop as it had some unexpected problems in-game. Andy apologised and said they're working on fixing it, and there will be a new Twitch drops campaign in the future. Hopefully around the launch of the Age of War is when I'm thinking. Now we move on to the Q&A section. When asked how the stamina changes will affect max corrupted sorcerers, Dennis said it will make life a little difficult, but this has already been play tested. With some extra points in grit and a careful choice of gear that offers you more stamina, it is still viable. Dennis made a point of each build being a personal choice, which was of course the underlying reason for the stats rework in the Age of Sorcery, so the choice is always good to have. Someone asked if they'd be fixing double jump Goomba builds, which is not something I've heard of, but it sounds fun to see. Dennis said there are changes coming that will make Goomba stomps much harder, requiring 2 people to coordinate. Stamina when climbing is effectively unchanged. While stamina for jumping, including double jumping, has been increased, climbing has been untouched by those changes. Dennis wasn't able to say with 100% certainty if modders would have access to the clan features like the emblem editor, though he said their design philosophy is to always keep things open for mods. He was pretty sure that was the case, he just couldn't quite say for certain. This update has no new movesets, but changes could come in the future for new attack animations or even full movesets if they're warranted. When asked about mods on consoles, which always comes up in these streams, Dennis said it's not on the roadmap. It's something they'd love to do, but it's an enormous task behind the scenes, likely due to how Xbox and PlayStation would handle them, along with concerns on memory and performance. Dennis said there are no plans right now, but they would love to do it. They also said there's no new map right now, and Dennis did in fact confirm that the Age of Amazon was indeed a joke. Unless... Conan exiled caravans are gone as they were temporary content, but of course Correct's dungeon is still there, though Dennis did mention that you might find a bit of a mess around the spire. Some PvP-centric changes are coming with a small revamp of the trebuchet system, though he didn't give too much detail on that or other items still in development. That being said, there is apparently a handheld battering ram coming in Chapter 2. The beam from Mech's spire is gone as a result of the ritual, though again Dennis said you should head over there to see what happened. Also, because Chapter 3 of the Age of Sorcery is done, the eclipse is gone too. There are no plans for server wipes, and there's no plans for it in the future unless there is no other choice. Dennis said that server wipes are the perfect way to get people to stop playing your game, which I do agree with. Finally, there is a new mount coming, but they said we'll have to wait to see what it is. So, I'm sure you're all wondering, when does the Age of War come out? The public beta was announced for May 23rd, so it's already out now. If you're not on PC though, when can you expect to be gathering your first treasure? Well, Chapter 1 of the Age of War will release on all platforms on June 22nd, so exactly a month from the date of this stream. So, in closing, I think, when it was announced that the Age of Sorcery was coming, I was excited but a tad apprehensive, or probably nervous is the better term. This was a massive step for Conan. I was very hopeful that it would manage to add that little something the game has been missing for a while. 9 months out from that reveal, and at the dawn of a new age, I can say that I'm more confident in Conan than ever before. The devs are doing some really good work, and perhaps most importantly for this chapter especially, they're targeting the things that people complain about and not only fixing it, but actively working to make it better. I know there are still issues on consoles and with QA. That is a slow, trudging march that you just have to improve over time, and to a degree, not that much can be done with the older consoles. But overall, I'd say that Conan is taking strides towards becoming even better. Again, Chapter 1 is very much a foundation for the wider and lofty updates coming in Chapter 2 and 3. Depending on how the purge changes play out, I think it could add something really special that Conan has needed for a while. I'm making this video just after the stream on the 22nd, and by the time you're watching this, I'm likely already in the Test Live client, trying out new features and working on videos for you guys, and I'm very excited to show those features off to you. Thank you for watching, and of course a massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. What do you think of the Age of War? Many people guessed pretty close to correct in my comments, so let me know what you think of these upcoming changes in the comments. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.